Genghis Khan is remembered as one of the most powerful men in history. His empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the heart of Europe. He changed trade, warfare, and even the map of the world. But behind that story of greatness lies another one, a story of fear, destruction, and the cost of power that still echoes centuries later. He was not born a king. He was born Temujin around the year 1162 on the cold grasslands of Mongolia. His early life was not the tale of a prince or a chosen warrior. His father was a tribal chief, but when Temujin was still a boy, his father was poisoned by enemies. The tribe abandoned the family. His mother and siblings were left with nothing, no food, no protection, no name that meant anything. Temujin grew up hungry and afraid. He learned early that mercy was not a law of the steppe. If he wanted to survive, he would have to become stronger than everyone who had betrayed him. Years later, when he united the Mongol tribes under his rule, he would demand absolute loyalty and give none in return. At first, there was nothing remarkable about him. The Mongols were divided into dozens of tribes that fought each other constantly. Temujin began as one of many ambitious warriors trying to rise from chaos. What set him apart was not charm or luck, but his understanding of fear. He saw that terror could hold people together longer than trust ever could. He built alliances when he needed them, then broke them when they stopped serving him. One of his early partners, Yamuka, was once his blood brother. Together they dreamed of uniting the Mongols. But when Yamuka claimed leadership for himself, Temujin turned against him. He defeated him, captured him, and executed him without hesitation. It was the beginning of his legend and the first sign of what he would become. When he finally united the Mongol tribes, he called himself Genghis Khan, which roughly means universal ruler. It was more than a title. It was a statement. From that moment, he no longer saw borders, only enemies and opportunities. His word was law. He reorganized his people into a disciplined army built on loyalty and punishment. Every soldier, from the lowest horseman to the highest general, was expected to obey without question. If one man deserted, his entire unit could be executed. It was brutal, but it worked. The Mongols, once seen as scattered nomads, became one of the most efficient military forces in history. Genghis rewarded ability, not birth. A herdsman could rise to command if he proved himself. He promoted messengers, blacksmiths, and common soldiers over noble-born rivals. It was a radical idea in the 12th century one that made his army both loyal and unpredictable. But his genius came with cruelty. To keep control, he ruled by fear. Villages that resisted him were wiped out entirely. Entire populations were killed so that no one else would dare to fight. Stories spread faster than his armies of towns burned to ashes, of rivers choked with bodies, of cities that vanished from maps. It was psychological warfare on a scale the world had never seen. At the same time, he enforced a kind of order that the Mongols had never known. He banned the kidnapping of women, outlawed theft, and created a system of communication called the Yam, a network of relay stations across thousands of miles. Messages could travel from China to Central Asia in days. Traders and travelers were protected under his rule. It was efficient, it was modern, and it was built on terror. When Genghis turned his attention to China, he met the Jin dynasty powerful, wealthy, and used to seeing the Mongols as barbarians. He studied their tactics for years, sending spies, testing borders, learning how their armies worked. When he finally invaded in 1211, he moved like a storm. His armies used speed, deception, and fear to break through walls and fortresses that had stood for centuries. They destroyed entire cities that refused to surrender. Some accounts claim that in one city alone, over 100,000 people were killed. Others say the number was higher. To those who submitted, Genghis offered protection and stability. To those who resisted, he offered extinction. He used both approaches deliberately to make obedience look like mercy. As his empire grew, so did his reputation. To some, he was a symbol of strength and destiny. To others, he was a monster. Even now, historians debate who he truly was. There are stories of him promoting religious tolerance, allowing Muslims, Christians, and Buddhists to worship freely. He outlawed the sale of women and granted diplomatic immunity to envoys, something rare for the time. These are the achievements that history books sometimes highlight. But the darker side never went away. When he invaded the Khwarezm Empire, a wealthy region that includes parts of modern Iran and Uzbekistan, it began with trade. Genghis sent a caravan of merchants to establish peaceful relations. The Khwarezm governor, suspicious of spies, executed them and sent back their heads. Genghis responded with one of the most devastating campaigns in history. He razed city after city, killing every man, woman, and child. The city of Nishapur was said to have been piled with skulls. At Merv, one of the greatest centers of learning in the Islamic world, his army reportedly slaughtered hundreds of thousands. Even his generals were horrified. By the time the campaign ended, millions were dead, and an entire civilization was gone. It was revenge, yes, but also strategy. Terror was his most reliable weapon. The more people feared him, the fewer battles he had to fight. And yet in the chaos, he built something lasting. He created one of the first written law codes of the steppe, the Yasa, a set of rules that governed everything from family to military conduct. He standardized weights and measures. He opened trade routes that would later become the Silk Road. He even encouraged diplomacy and cultural exchange between distant lands. This is the contradiction that defines him. He was both a destroyer and a builder, a visionary and a tyrant. To his people, he brought unity after centuries of division. To the rest of the world, he brought death on a scale that reshaped continents. Even his personal life carried the same duality. He had many wives, most taken from conquered tribes. Some were treated as queens, others were hostages. His sons would go on to rule vast territories, spreading both his laws and his wars. Modern genetic studies suggest that as many as 16 million men alive today may descend from him, a biological legacy of power and conquest unlike any other. By the time he died in 1227, the Mongol Empire covered more land than Rome, Persia, and Alexander's combined. But what it left behind was not peace, it was the memory of fear. Cities that had once thrived for centuries were erased. Populations vanished. And yet, for many Mongols, he was and still is a national hero, the father of their nation. History, as always, depends on who tells it. To some, Genghis Khan was a unifier, a genius, a man who brought order to chaos. To others, he was the hand of death. The truth lies somewhere between the smoke of his battles and the silence that followed them. He built an empire larger than anyone before him, but every brick was laid on the bones of those who refused to kneel. His greatness cannot be separated from his cruelty because one was built entirely upon the other. That is the story of his rise, not of a hero, but of a man who learned that the fastest way to shape the world was to burn it first. When Genghis Khan built his empire, he didn't just conquer land, he changed how power itself worked. His empire didn't rely on castles or bloodlines, it relied on obedience. Every decision came from him, and every life under his rule existed at his mercy. What began as a mission to unite the Mongol tribes became a relentless campaign to control the known world. The Mongol army moved faster than any in history. Each soldier carried several horses and could ride for days without stopping. They were trained to live off the land, to drink their horses' blood for survival if needed, and to move in silence. When they attacked, they surrounded cities in coordinated waves, cutting off escape routes before anyone even realized what was happening. Their tactics were years ahead of their time and terrifying in their precision. In every campaign, Genghis used the same strategy: offer peace first, then annihilate anyone who refused. This was not just cruelty, it was policy. By destroying one city completely, he saved himself the cost of fighting 10 others. The message spread by word of mouth faster than any written decree: surrender or disappear. Yet his leadership was not built only on fear. He listened to scholars, engineers, and foreign advisors. He valued ideas more than heritage. He recruited Persians to handle administration, Chinese engineers to build siege weapons, and Uyghur scribes to develop a written script for the Mongol language. His empire absorbed talent as easily as it absorbed territory. But the contradiction remained. Every step forward for civilization came with a trail of blood behind it. When the Mongols took Zhongdu, present-day Beijing, they burned the city to the ground. Survivors spoke of streets piled with corpses and smoke that darkened the sky for days. Chronicles from Persia and China describe similar scenes: entire populations erased, libraries burned, and temples destroyed. The death toll from Genghis Khan's campaigns is still debated, but some historians estimate it could be as high as 40 million people. And yet, within that destruction, he built systems that lasted centuries. His empire connected east and west in ways no one else had managed. Under his rule, merchants could travel safely from China to the Mediterranean, something unheard of in the ancient world. The Silk Road flourished, trade expanded, and for a time, ideas and inventions flowed freely between civilizations that had barely known each other before. Gunpowder, paper, printing, and new forms of art and medicine moved across continents because of the routes he secured. But this peace came at a cost few could comprehend. Every mile of safety for a merchant was paid for by someone who had resisted him. Every city that welcomed trade was built on the ashes of another that had refused to. The Mongol peace, as historians later called it, was a quiet born from exhaustion, not harmony. Even the men closest to Genghis lived in fear of him. Betrayal was met with instant death. He killed his half-brother in his youth for stealing food. Later, when his generals questioned orders, they vanished without a trace. To him, doubt was treason, and weakness was a disease that could not be allowed to spread. There are stories about his personal habits, some true, some blurred by time. He was said to never sleep in the same tent twice while on campaign, to distrust his own cooks, and to ride for days with no escort. He spoke little, preferred action over words, and carried an unshakable belief that he had been chosen by the eternal blue sky, the Mongol god, to rule the world. It was this belief that justified everything he did. He wasn't just building an empire, he believed he was cleansing the earth. Those who opposed him were not just enemies, they were obstacles to divine order. And so his armies continued, pushing westward through Central Asia into Persia and Eastern Europe. By the 1220s, Genghis Khan's empire was the largest the world had ever seen. His banners flew from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific, and his generals commanded legions that could crush entire kingdoms in months. Yet the man himself was changing. The endless wars had aged him. He had seen his sons grow ambitious, his generals grow restless, and his empire, now too large to control, begin to fracture beneath its own weight. In his final years, Genghis became obsessed with revenge again, this time against the Tangut kingdom of Western Ye, which had defied him after swearing loyalty. He led one last campaign into their territory, destroying city after city. The Tanguts were wiped from history almost completely. Their written language, their art, their culture gone. Only ruins remain, buried under sand. It was during this campaign in 1227 that Genghis Khan died. The exact cause is still a mystery. Some say he fell from his horse and suffered fatal injuries. Others claim he was wounded in battle or poisoned by a captured princess. The truth was buried with him, literally. His funeral was secret. According to legend, his soldiers killed everyone who saw the procession and rode their horses over the grave to erase its location. No one knows where he was buried. But death did not end his influence. His sons and grandsons continued his conquests, pushing the empire even farther. Within a generation, the Mongol Empire stretched from Korea to Hungary. Kublai Khan, his grandson, would become the emperor of China and founder of the Yuan dynasty. Under his descendants, science, trade, and culture flourished. But the blood that built it never disappeared from memory. The world Genghis Khan left behind was permanently changed. He destroyed more cities than any conqueror before or after him. Yet he opened roads that shaped global trade for centuries. He slaughtered millions. Yet he laid the foundations for international law and diplomacy. He unified warring tribes into a single nation, but at a cost so high that even his own people feared the memory of his wrath. To this day, his name divides opinion. In Mongolia, he is still celebrated as the father of the nation, a symbol of unity and pride. His image is printed on currency, carved into monuments, and taught in schools as a model of strength and leadership. But in China, Persia, and Eastern Europe, his name still carries another meaning, one of ruin, death, and erasure. Some historians argue that without him, the modern world would look very different. His empire accelerated the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies between East and West. It helped shape the future of global communication and trade. But others say that the price was too high, that the scale of his violence cannot be justified by progress. In the end, Genghis Khan remains a paradox. He built the largest contiguous empire in human history, yet his methods were as primitive as the world he rose from. He was both a visionary leader and a ruthless destroyer, a man who believed he was chosen by the heavens, yet acted like a god of war. The story of Genghis Khan is not about good or evil. It's about what happens when a single man believes the world belongs to him. His victories reshaped civilizations, but his shadow still lingers over them. For every road he built, there's a city he burned. For every law he wrote, there's a people he erased. And for every story that calls him great, there's another whispered quietly that says he was not a good man. Because the truth about Genghis Khan is not in the glory of his empire. It's in the silence left behind after he was gone.